Welcome to today's practical demonstration. Today we're going to be talking about pH. What is pH? pH in layman's term is basically measuring the acidity or the alkalinity of a food substance or of a material. In this case, in the food industry, we always measure pH in most of the cases. Why do we have to measure pH? pH, in some cases, it's an indicator of chemical reactions that are happening in food products. Take, for example, fermentation. During fermentation, microorganisms, they release as their byproduct certain organic acids, and those organic acids, they change the composition of the food product to a low acid nature. In some cases, microorganisms can also increase the pH of your food product. So it is very important to measure pH as an indicator of chemical reactions. In some cases, microorganisms cannot survive under certain pH conditions, so we then use pH or the low pH as a preservation technique. In other cases, pH also indicates to us the sensorial properties of the food. Is the product too sweet? Is the product too sour? So in some cases, you can also hear the sourness, and that indicates that the product has a low pH. So what are the tools that we can use to measure pH in food properties? We use what we call instruments or tools such as a pH meter over here, and then we also have what we call test strips, and we also have what we call litmus papers. So each of these tools, they of course give you a reading or an indicator in terms of how the pH is in your food product. But let us start with the papers or with the strips. So here I've got what we call litmus red. If you were in chemistry class in high school, you would know that there's also something called litmus blue. Right? So this is basically a strip of paper that you can use in order to do your analysis. And this is very simple. So if I want to measure the pH of milk, I will just immerse. So here I've got milk. So I will just immerse the milk or the strip into the milk, and then I can just put it here. And then now I want to use and see what is going to happen if I add in some apple cider vinegar. And then you can take your strip here, and then so here is the apple cider vinegar, and then I can put it back. So, and then you can also use these type of color strips, which here on top they've got a number from 0 up until 7, and then from 7 up until 14. So these strips here, they've got 4 different color codes. So if I can say now I want to measure the pH of the apple cider vinegar, you just immerse it just for a few minutes. This is my apple cider vinegar here. And then on the other case, let's say I want to use the milk. Here I want to find out what is the pH of milk. Why? Because in some cases the pH of milk will also indicate to you that the milk is also going to become sour. So when the milk is sour, or when it's turning to what we call amasi. Amasi amyoli is a product that has got low pH or which is acidic. So in some cases it can indicate that the product has spoiled. So this is what I've done now, using the test strip. A tool that we can use to evaluate the pH of various food products is a digital pH meter. The difference between a digital pH meter and the test strips is that a digital pH meter will give us a number, a quantitative number that we can use. So how does a digital pH meter work? A digital pH meter has a probe, and this probe is always kept in solution. so that the probe does not dry out or forms the salt crystals. So it should always be kept in solution. So the probe is the one that will be inserted into the food product to measure your pH based on the ions that are present. Remember that in terms of pH, you've got the OH minus molecules and then you've got the H plus molecules, which gives a charge into your food product, right, or your solution. But before you can use a pH meter, we need to calibrate a pH meter. So all equipment that are used in the laboratory should be calibrated. So if you are using scales, it should be calibrated. You are using pH meter, it should be calibrated. By calibration, we mean a resetting of the equipment or the tools in order to check if they are still functional or they are still within specification. So what do we use to calibrate a pH meter? We use what we call pH buffers. So you've got three types of buffers that we can have. So you can have pH buffer 4, which will check the acidity nature, and then you also have pH buffer 7, which is the neutral, and then you've got pH buffer 9, which is the alkaline. So here I've got two buffers here. So we normally decant these buffers into these small containers or holders. So this pH has already been calibrated. So I've checked it, it's still functional. So I can then take my buffers and put them on the side here. So now, whenever you're going to use a pH meter or any equipment that is going to come in contact with the product, it should be cleaned. So the first thing that I'm going to use is to clean my pH meter. So the pH meter, you can also pull it closer to you, and then if you press here, so you can be able to move the probe up and down, so you can be able to adjust it. In this case, you can then take out the probe like this. So the probe can be taken out, and then if I screw over here, and then put my solution here carefully, and you can also still retain your probe here, right? So if you want to do like this, so some people normally would put in like this, and then you basically want to wash your probe here with distilled water. So I'm using distilled water in order to wash here. So you must tell us, what is the pH of distilled water? I put the question to you. Find out why do we use distilled water and what is the pH of distilled water. Right? Right. So and this is what I'm gonna do. So what I can then do is to take out my probe here and then just slowly blot it here so that the distilled water does not remain. So it's very important to wash your pH meter each and every time you're going to measure the pH and in between your samples, because you don't want to contaminate your samples or so that you can get an incorrect reading. So here I'm going to start with, for example, the first solution that I'm going to make is my apple cider vinegar. Remember, we've also done the same thing with the test strips. So here I've got my apple cider vinegar, here I've got my milk solution. So you can also take your cider vinegar and then you put your pH probe back here. So let me just do it like this. Right. And then you can put your solution over here. And then just make sure that the probe is completely immersed into the solution. And then now my pH meter is starting to evaluate or starting to give me the reading for the apple cider vinegar. And from what I see here, it is saying the pH meter, the pH is 2.94. And then in this case, I'm using my digital notebook. So some of you would have your manual notebook, then you can then put in the value that you have obtained. Always record your results. So here my results is 2.94 for the apple cider vinegar. So I'm just going to put it down here, 2.94. So that is my reading. And then once I'm done, I can then take my probe up and then remove the apple cider vinegar, put it here, and then I can bring this part over here, and then this is what I can do. Just wash and wash and wash, and then you can then take it out if you want, and then you kind of blot it very nicely. So the front part of the probe is the most sensitive part. Make sure that you do not break it, or if you are going to be using semi-liquid samples like mayonnaise, make sure that there is no build-up of product here in the inside, okay? So that we can also take care of our equipment. So you can put it here. Now I want to measure the milk, and then I can put my milk here, and then I can still just make sure that the probe is immersed. Then you press in read. And once the pH is stable, then your pH meter is going to give you a reading. So here for the milk, I'm getting 6.3. Okay, so it's 6.43. And then you take your reading, you put it down. So basically, that is what you're going to do. And then afterwards, you wash your pH probe. Your pH probe here should be washed. Blot it with paper towel, and then it goes to the storage solution. So you immerse it in the storage solution, and then you close it, and then you can put it here, and then you can switch off the pH meter to save electricity. And then you make sure that your bench is completely clean. And then now I'm going to go back to my test strips. So what did I find out in the test strips? So when I look at this test strip here, it gives me 4 colors. So here, these colors, it's red here. So this is pH 3, and then here I already got 2.9. This is for the apple cider vinegar, and then here I got pH 6.5 or 6.45, so it falls around this range. So you can already see that the pH strip is a quick method, but it does not give you a digital value or a number, but the pH meter gives you a number, and it must be calibrated. So in the food industry, when we design food specifications, we rely on the pH meter tool in order for us to be able to have a quantitative number that we can put in a product specification. So now you've seen how we can then measure pH. So then the question is, how do we measure pH of solid materials or semi-solid materials? The answer is very simple. Firstly, if you've got a solid material, you must crush it, or also, for example, put it in add in distilled water to give it that liquid flow, and then from there you can be able to insert it in a probe. But you cannot really measure the pH of a solid potato using these type of pH meters. At an advanced level, you do have specific pH probes that can be used to measure the pH of meat and also the pH of cheese. So that's it for today's practical or for today's demonstration. Then you have to go and watch and complete the practical test, which is going to be on Blackboard. Okay.